Hi kids, it's Mr. Edwidge. We're going to start to take a look at ancient Egypt. So we're going to start that by looking at this National Geographic book. It is a read to me. You can choose to have it read to you if you miss this, or you can have me read to you. It really doesn't matter either way, but I just thought I'd do this so you could hear my voice too. Again, this is about ancient Egypt, and we are starting our unit on ancient civilization. So we'll be talking about different cultures from the past and different things they did, how they lived their life, and how they affect our society today. So this particular book says in its summary, dig into ancient Egypt's amazing past with pyramids, mummies, pharaohs, and gods. And far and away, most third graders are interested in the mummies. We may get to that today. We may save some of that for tomorrow. It begins with a peek into the past. It took Howard Carter years of searching before he found Tutankhamun's tomb. And Tutankhamun was the Egyptian pharaoh King Tut, which most of you are familiar with. On November 26, 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter stood in front of a sealed door. It had been closed for 3,000 years. His hands shaking, Carter chipped a hole in the door and peered inside. "Can you see anything?" asked a member of his team. "Yes," said Carter, "wonderful things." Carter had found the tomb of the king, Tutankhamun. It sparkled with treasures. The discovery gave people a glimpse of one of the greatest civilizations in history, ancient Egypt. The caption says Tomb Talk, archaeologist. An archaeologist is a person who studies objects like old tools, pottery, and tombs to learn more about human history. Civilization, the culture and way of life of a group of people. And then this particular caption says a replica of the tomb that Carter and his team found. And that replica is just like a recreation. So those aren't real gold pieces, but in the actual tomb, there was gold pieces. So if you're not familiar with what an archaeologist is, I will tell you, if you've ever seen or heard of the movie Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones is an archaeologist. So those movies might be a little bit old for you, but your parents will certainly know about them if you want to ask them about Indiana Jones. So they'll tell you a little bit more. And of course, I can't forget the joke on the upper right. What did the little Egyptian say when he woke up from a nightmare? "I want my mummy." So a lot of kids associate ancient Egypt with the pharaohs and the pyramids and the Sphinx, the Great Sphinx. But what a lot of people don't know, or at least a lot of kids don't know, is the real reason the ancient Egyptian culture got to be so large and so prolific, so rich, was because of the Nile River. The Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world, and Egypt, or the Nile, runs right through Egypt and kind of banks along the Nile River. It says Egypt is a hot, dry desert, but the Nile River runs right through it. The Nile used to flood every year. The floodwater left behind thick soil called silt. The silt was good for growing crops. People settled along the Nile more than 7,500 years ago. To keep track of when they should plant crops, they made a calendar based on the Nile's yearly flood. It had a year of 365 days divided into 12 months, and we still use this calendar today. So you can see, even though there's desert all around it, there's actually a good water source. And countries or communities or cities can't develop without water. So not only did the water provide food and crops and possibly fishing and things like that, but it also um, provided rich soil. I guess I already said that. It provided rich soil for them to grow crops on. And I know what I was going to say. It also provided a means of transportation for them so they could float things up and down the river. So I have to charge my computer here, so give me a second. And on this page, this is where they talk about the Nile as a means of transportation. Egyptian sailboats got extra power from the rowers' long poles were used to steer the boats. So here you have a picture of what the Egyptian boats used to look like, and they were long and skinny, and they had all these people on both sides, and most of those people were indentured servants, I believe, and or slaves to an extent, or at least they were labor workers, so they weren't very wealthy. The wealthy people owned the ships, and then they would hire people, sometimes for pay, sometimes not. They would direct them to row the boats for them. In any case, it says Egyptians used the Nile like a highway through their land. They built boats and steered them up and down the river. The boats carried things to trade with other countries. Ancient Egypt grew into a powerful civilization. It was one of the most powerful in the history of the world. It lasted for nearly 3,000 years, from 3,150 BC to 30 BC. And this is a timeline, it's a vertical timeline, but this kind of gives you an idea of different things that happen throughout history. But it's super hard to understand until you get a little older. I mean, it's even difficult for me to understand what 3,000 years ago really was. 3,000 years ago was so long ago that I have no understanding or idea except for what I learned from the history books. Um, Anyway, the caption reads, "The year AD 1 is the first year in the calendar we use today. The time of ancient Egypt was before that. Historians decided to count the time before the year AD by counting backward from that year. They called those years BC. For example, King Tut was born in 1341 BC. He became king in 1332 BC when he was 9 years old." So those are some interesting facts. Don't worry too much if you don't understand the timeline right now. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the point is 3,000 years BC was about 5,000 years ago, and that's a long, 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 long time. It's good to be king. A statue of the pharaoh Ramses the second. The rulers of ancient Egypt were called pharaohs. People believed the pharaoh was a god on earth. The pharaoh had all of the power. He or she made the laws. The pharaoh owned the land and everything in it. Artists carved and painted pharaohs into statues and buildings. They always made the pharaoh appear young and fit, no matter how he or she looked in real life. This stone carving shows a pharaoh with a god. And kids, one thing that's just kind of interesting to know is that a lot of these sculptures were originally painted, and over the course of thousands of years and sand and wind, the paint kind of eroded away. So we're left with these kind of blank faces. But at first, they were brightly colored images. Ramses II was one of ancient Egypt's most important pharaohs. He ruled for 65 years and built more monuments than any king before him. Tutankhamun only ruled for 10 years, but he's famous because he was buried with more than 5,000 treasures like thrones, jewelry, a gold coffin, and a chariot. In King Tut's tomb, a throne and a chariot were discovered. Queen of the Nile. Most pharaohs were men, but not all. For a long time, experts didn't know the pharaoh Hatshepsut was a woman. That's because she ordered statues and paintings to show her as a man with a beard and big muscles. Tomb Talk down here says chariot. This chariot is a two-wheeled vehicle pulled by a horse. Mighty monuments. These are the big structures that kids often hear about. It says some pharaohs ordered huge structures called pyramids to be built. The pyramids honored the pharaohs. One was the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza. It was the tallest structure in the world for more than 3,800 years. It was 481 feet tall, and it took 20 years to build. The Egyptians created the Great Sphinx to guard the pyramids. This statue is as tall as the White House. Its paws are bigger than city buses. The Sphinx is a made-up creature with a lion's body and a human head. Egyptians carved sphinx statues to guard important areas. And the big sphinx we hear about is, that's just the largest one, but they made other structures like this too to act as guards. So the one of the interesting pieces about all this is to think about the fact that the Egyptians did this with very little or with no modern technology. I mean, they used simple machines. They used muscle, they used levers, they used pulleys, they used ropes. And so if you're ever curious, it's worth looking into how these pyramids or massive structures were built. And we're not gonna take a whole lot of time to look at them here in class, but we might take some. Right now, this is just kind of exposure to it. So let's take a look and see what happens next. In this well, this is probably where they talk about it. In this painting, thousands of workers build Pharaoh Khafre's pyramid at Giza. The workers who built the pyramids did not have machines. Experts think they cut stone from quarries into huge blocks. They dragged the blocks to boats and floated them down the Nile. Then they hauled the blocks up ramps into place on the pyramid. So this takes a lot of effort and hundreds of people to do this work. Lost City. In 1999, an ancient town near the pyramids was discovered. Long ago, this town was home to workers who built the pyramids. The area was bigger than 10 football fields. And it says archaeologists or people carefully dig up the ancient town because if they're not careful when they do it, they can actually damage things and then maybe they don't recognize them or maybe they can't place them. So this type of work takes years to really do carefully and to do correctly. And Tumtok quarries are areas of rocks cut from the ground for building projects. So a lot of these stones were brought in. They weren't just right there available in the desert. And again, that just adds to the workload of all these things. The joke, where do mummies swim? The Dead Sea. It's always good to have a little humor in there. I'm going to turn the page here, but I think we're going to stop here for today because this is probably getting to be long enough. If you want to read ahead, you can a little bit. It's always interesting, but they'll start to talk about mummies, and we'll start talking about mummies here tomorrow. It talks about life after death. It talks about how they made mummies. And then just some fun facts about ancient Egypt. So that's all the farther we'll move ahead. But kids, remember to check the link below because I'm going to attach an Art Hub for Kids video to this just for something fun for you to do. And if you want to save that to the very end of the day, you can work on that with your friends at end of day time because we will have those links open for about 45 minutes from 2:30 to 3:15. So you don't have to do them then, but you do need to make sure you complete it at some point today. It's just how to draw a cartoon pharaoh. Thanks, kids. We'll see you tomorrow for a little bit more of ancient Egypt. Bye.